Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the sticky, smoky back alleys of ancient Rome, where the cobblestones are slick with rain, or something you hope is rain, and the air hangs heavy with sweat, oil, and a whiff of trouble. You tiptoe past flickering torchlight and the clatter of sandals, only to realize you're not a spectator. You're the one being dragged by the arm, face first into Roman justice. And justice? Oh, it's about to get very creative. You're accused of something small. Maybe you lied under oath. Maybe you forged a document. Or maybe you looked at a senator's prized chicken the wrong way. Doesn't matter. The Roman court isn't about forgiveness, it's about spectacle. And sometimes, that means punishments so ridiculous, you'd swear it was a lost Monty Python sketch, except you're the star, and you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a wide public square, pressed between a statue of Jupiter and a barrel of what smells suspiciously like pickled fish. The crowd's gathering, whispers curling through the air like smoke. You've been sentenced for perduello, high treason. Sounds dramatic? That's because it is. In early Rome, that meant being sewn into a sack with a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster, and then tossed into the Tiber River. It's called pena cullae, and yes, it's real. Imagine that for a second, confined in total darkness, limbs entangled with panicking animals, the sack writhing like a cursed piñata. You don't know what bites you first, the snake, the monkey, or your own regret. Historians still argue whether this punishment was applied consistently, or if it became more symbolic over time. Either way, it's bad news if you're the one getting stuffed into Rome's weirdest gift bag. But maybe your crime wasn't so grand. Maybe you're a lowly thief. Then your punishment might involve being burned alive in a tunic soaked with resin, the tunica molesta, or annoying tunic. And yes, that's its literal name. It's like ancient Rome's version of a flaming onesie, soaked in flammable pitch and tied tightly to your body. You're paraded around, a living torch in training, while a crowd of well-fed senators and toga-clad gawkers shout things like, "Justice," and, "Look, he's glowing." The tunica molesta was especially popular in the ludi, or public games. Criminals were often saved for the grand finale, ignited as part of a nighttime show. The worst part? These weren't always hardened criminals. Sometimes, being unpopular, loud, or just poor was enough to land you in the hot seat. Literally. And if you think you could have pleaded your way out of it, think again. Roman courts were extremely theatrical. Prosecutors might show up in black mourning clothes, sobbing dramatically. Accusers could pay actors to reenact your alleged crimes in front of the jury. And you're standing there wondering how your cousin's stolen goat became an Oscar-worthy tragedy. Then there's the damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It sounds like something from a gladiator movie, because it is. Except you're not armed. You're stripped naked, thrown into the Colosseum, and told to run. Lions, panthers, maybe even an elephant, depending on how exotic the emperor is feeling that day, chase you through sand soaked in old blood. A few guards bet on how long you'll last. One casually peels a fig. One mainstream historical fact here: Emperor Augustus, the PR king of Rome, actually dialed down some of the more extreme punishments. He preferred exile over execution, unless you insulted him in poetry, in which case, well, we'll get to that. But earlier emperors, like Nero, were more about the fire and flames vibe. Especially when the accused were Christians, who were often blamed for disasters and turned into living torches, literally used to light Nero's garden parties. It was punishment as ambiance. Now, let's pause for a moment to talk about toilets. Because yes, even bathrooms had their own justice system. Roman public latrines were communal, seatless, and, let's just say, not private. Theft, believe it or not, was common there. Someone might rob you while you're mid-squat. So Rome created a special latrina lex, or toilet law. If you committed crimes in or around the lavatory, especially during sacred festivals, you could be punished by having your nose cut off. Because, poetic justice? You stink. You lose the sniffer. Quirky tidbit time. Roman priests would sometimes inspect the entrails of animals to divine guilt. So if you were accused of a crime, You might be forced to stand by while someone slices open a chicken and declares, "Ah, see. His liver is spotty. Guilty." There were trained specialists called haruspices whose entire job was gut reading. Imagine trying to explain that to your parents at career day. Oh, and remember that senator whose chicken you insulted? If that guy was rich and vindictive enough, he might accuse you of impietas, offending the gods. It sounds vague, because it was. Forget skipping a temple visit or failing to sacrifice the right number of goats. You could be punished for a weird dream, an unlucky sneeze during a speech, or tripping over a sacred step. The Romans really believed that if the gods were angry, everyone would suffer. Fires, plagues, losing to the Gauls, so they didn't mess around. Punishment here? Public flogging, sometimes with rods dipped in salt. Because, pain wasn't enough, it needed seasoning. And if the priest in charge was feeling particularly extra, you might be forced to crawl naked through the forum, reciting apologies in verse. Bad verse. That you wrote yourself. In Latin, historians still argue whether some of these punishments were ever truly enforced, or if they existed more as cautionary tales whispered between wine cups and olive bowls. But the fear was real. And when fear is real, so is power. And don't think you'd be safe just because you were a Roman citizen. In theory, citizens had more rights. In practice, the richer you were, the more likely you'd be offered exile. The poorer you were, the more likely you'd become lion chow. There were loopholes, of course. If you confessed quickly, or blamed it on dreams, omens, or Jupiter having a bad hair day, you might get off with a fine, or forced labor in a lead mine, which is like being slowly erased from history, one cough at a time. By now, the crowd's dispersing. The fire's out, the sacks sunk, and the Colosseum's being swept. Somewhere, a senator yawns and asks what's for lunch. Meanwhile, you're left blinking at the smoldering remains of Roman justice and thinking, how is this just day one? Awaiting, continue. You wake up somewhere darker now. Not metaphorically, literally pitch black. The kind of black that feels like it's crawling across your skin. A rat scurries past your foot, and for a wild moment, you wonder if it's also been accused of something. In ancient Rome, that's not a joke. Animals stood trial. Welcome to the part of your punishment journey where even goats get legal representation, and ghosts are allowed to testify. So, you're sitting in a dank cell, your hands bound, when a magistrate strides in. He's got a scroll in one hand, a very dramatic cape, and a look that says, "You're not going to like this." He reads your charges, sure, standard theft, bribery, the usual. But the weird twist? You're being tried alongside your pet dog, who allegedly barked at a sacred procession. Turns out, in Rome, animals could be held legally accountable for actions that offended society. The trial goes forward. There's a prosecutor, there's a jury, and the dog is there, panting, drooling on the floor, being silently judged by a guy with a waxed mustache and olive crumbs on his toga. This wasn't even rare. Pigs who bit babies, horses who caused accidents, even insects during grain infestations. Rome's courts were like Judge Judy, but for pigeons. One famous case? After a roof collapse in 150 BCE, killing several workers, the architect's tools were put on trial. Yes, the tools. And they were found guilty. Roman logic went like this. If an object caused death or disorder, even if accidentally, it had to be punished. Sometimes this meant ceremonial destruction. Sometimes exile, which raises the question, how exactly do you exile a hammer? Historians still argue whether these punishments were meant to be symbolic acts to appease the gods or if Romans genuinely feared rogue inanimate objects gaining sentience. Honestly, have you seen those statues of Mars? They look like they know things. But let's back up. You're still sitting there, watching your dog's defense attorney argue that barking is a natural instinct, not an act of sacrilege. The jury's not buying it. The sentence? Death by public stoning, for the dog. You, meanwhile, are given damnatio memoriae. It sounds poetic, but it's brutal. Every trace of your existence will be erased. Your name scratched off inscriptions. Your portrait defaced. It's as if Rome is saying, not only will you die, we'll pretend you never existed. This was usually reserved for traitors or disgraced emperors. Caligula got the treatment, though not for long. Some fans kept sneaking his name back into records. And it's terrifyingly effective. Your tomb? Desecrated. Your will? Invalid. Your family? Shamed for generations. You're basically the ancient Roman equivalent of being deleted from every group chat and blocked on all scrolls. And here's where it gets really wild. Sometimes, it wasn't the living pressing charges, it was the dead. In certain cases, Romans held posthumous trials, where the accused was already 6 feet under. If someone was suspected of witchcraft, fraud, or just being generally cursed, their corpse might be exhumed, tried, and publicly shamed. That meant digging up grandma, placing her on a wooden bench, and having toga-clad accusers yell at her skeleton while a bored scribe took notes. One quirky tidbit? Some scholars claim this practice also extended to inanimate symbols. Roman emperors would sometimes try the memory of previous rulers and vote to strip their divine status. You start to feel like nothing is safe from prosecution here. Not dogs, not tools, not ghosts, definitely not you. And speaking of ghosts, let's talk about the lemures. These weren't Casper-style friendly spirits. Roman lemures were the angry dead, usually people who died violently, without proper rites, or with a really strong grudge. Once a year, during the Lemuria festival, Romans would perform midnight rituals to ward them off, tossing black beans behind their backs while chanting ancient phrases. But if a lemur showed up early, yeah, you'd probably be legally obligated to explain yourself. Imagine being sued in a dream. That happened. Accused murderers or thieves might claim they were visited by the ghost of their victim in a vision, and that counted as evidence. Some priests would even act as mediators between the living and dead. If the ghost seemed vengeful, you could be punished to appease it. Again, no modern court would go for that, but Rome? Rome invited the dead into the jury box. The punishment for disturbing the peace of the dead was often exile, or worse, being buried alive. One of the rarest and most terrifying punishments was the burial of the Vestal Virgins, Rome's sacred priestesses. If they broke their vow of chastity, they weren't just fired, they were sealed alive in an underground chamber, given a single lamp, and left to await the gods' judgment. It's an open scholarly debate whether the state genuinely believed in the ritual's religious function, or if it was more about preserving appearances. And you know what? While we're on the topic of absurd but terrifying, let's discuss the punishment for false testimony. Lying in court was a huge deal. So how did the Romans discourage it? Simple. If you were caught lying, you could be forced to walk around town with a sack of rocks tied to your back, wearing a hat made of donkey hide. Everyone knew what that meant. Kids pointed, strangers spat, friends pretended not to see you. The weight wasn't the worst part, it was the humiliation. In fact, public humiliation was one of Rome's most versatile punishments. Didn't pay your taxes? You might be forced to wear a placard around your neck listing your debts. Disrespected a nobleman? You might have to carry a severed pig's head through the streets while apologizing. It wasn't just about pain. It was about putting you on display and letting the crowd chew your dignity to pieces. There's a sensory overload to it all. Chalk dust from the tribunal, incense wafting from a nearby temple, the tang of bronze coins clinking in your bound hands. Rome didn't do quiet punishment. Everything was pageant, parade, and performative justice. The empire didn't just rule. It reminded you it ruled, every time someone was marched in chains past the forum. By now, you're thinking, surely this is rock bottom. But remember, in Rome, there's always another level. The next thing you hear isn't your name being called. It's poetry, a badly written poem, and it's your sentence. But that's a tale for Section 3. You're not in chains anymore. No lions, no sacks, no flaming tunics. You're sitting on a breezy cliffside, gazing out at a calm sea, soft wind curling through your tattered toga. Sounds peaceful, right? Until you remember you've been exiled. For writing a poem. Not a bad poem, mind you. Just the wrong poem. Maybe it insulted someone important. Maybe it made the wrong metaphor. Or maybe it just hit too close to home. In ancient Rome, words weren't just powerful, they were punishable. And exile was the empire's go-to for those whose voices were too sharp or too clever. You're following in the sandals of Ovid, the famed Roman poet who found himself abruptly shipped off to the desolate shores of Tamus, modern-day Romania, without a proper trial. His crime? Carmen et error, a poem and a mistake. Historians still argue what that second part meant. Was it political gossip? Scandalous love poetry? Helping someone dodge imperial consequences? No one knows for sure. But the punishment stuck, and exile wasn't some cushy villa vacation. You were cut off. No wealth, no friends, no status. Just seagulls and self-pity. If Rome forgot you, you were lucky. If it remembered, your name could still be spat on in the Senate. And don't think writing helped. Some exiles were forbidden from putting pen to parchment. Others were forced to write, to produce poems praising their own banishment. Imagine that. You're sunburned, swatting bugs, and trying to rhyme disgrace with place in iambic hexameter. Sometimes exile was internal, banishment to the countryside or an abandoned fortress. But often, it meant living just outside civilization, in a kind of human buffering zone. You'd have locals who didn't speak Latin, maybe didn't want you there, and no idea if your pardon would ever arrive. Of course, if exile wasn't dramatic enough, Rome had another tool: punishment by poetry. Yes, real thing. If someone insulted you publicly, say, called you a goat-faced glutton in verse, you could sue them. But some emperors flipped this idea and used public verse as punishment. Offenders would be forced to memorize and recite humiliating poems, often written about themselves. Sometimes, the verses were branded onto walls or etched into public fountains. Imagine this: you're stuck in the marketplace, wearing a donkey ear hat, a popular shame accessory, while reading aloud a 3-stanza poem about how you lied about your taxes and eat figs too loudly. It sounds silly, but in a society obsessed with honor and reputation, it was devastating. And speaking of reputation, let's not forget ostracism, which, while more famous in Athens, had Roman echoes. Certain neighborhoods practiced their own version of soft exile, where someone could be effectively removed from society through refusal to acknowledge them. You walk into a bathhouse. No one speaks. You try to trade at the market. No one makes eye contact. It's social death. No food, no gossip, no invitations. There's even a fringe theory that the silent treatment punishment was sometimes enforced by local councils. You may remain, but no Roman may speak your name or hear your words. Now that's creepy. You become a ghost while still alive. But if exile and poetry weren't enough, you might find yourself tangled in another bizarre web: magical punishment. Rome didn't exactly endorse sorcery, but it believed in it a lot. Magic crimes could be punished by public denunciation, ritual cleansing, or, if the emperor was feeling cranky, execution. But often, the punishment involved being forced to undo the magic. Cue long ceremonies, goat entrails, prayers, and being smeared with ashes while standing backwards on a cracked tile. Yes, that's specific. One famous magical scandal involved a noblewoman accused of enchanting a senator with love potions. Her punishment? Drinking her own alleged potion. A love potion roulette. If it was real, she'd confess. If it wasn't, well, at least she'd have shiny hair. Quirky tidbit. Some love spells included ingredients like crocodile dung, crushed gemstones, and feathers from birds, who never sleep. Guess who had to collect those feathers? You. Then there were punishments tied to omens. If an eclipse happened on the day of your trial, you might get a lighter sentence, or a harsher one, depending on who read the stars. A sneeze at the wrong moment could doom you. A bird flying left to right across the forum might save your life. One senator reportedly avoided conviction for embezzlement because a crow pooped on his accuser's head during the hearing. Divine intervention, Roman style. And what about economic crimes? Rome loved taxes, hated tax evaders, and had a flair for punishing them with style. Forget boring audits. Offenders could be paraded in debt chains, heavy links forged with symbolic coins, rattling down alleyways while children mocked them with little wooden abacuses. Sometimes their homes were marked with soot symbols indicating fraud. In extreme cases, they'd be assigned to financial slavery, working as accountants for state grain warehouses, a fate considered so dull and thankless that it was nicknamed paper death. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman officials regularly posted crime walls, public boards listing those punished for fraud, treason, or bribery. Think ancient Twitter call-outs, but chiseled in stone. These could stay up for years, even after the person was dead. And if your name appeared on one, forget social life. You were toast. Yet among all these punishments, the strangest thing? How often they were paired with ritual forgiveness. You might be whipped in the street, then brought to a temple to be symbolically cleansed. You might be exiled, then recalled with a triumphal procession. It was as if Rome was saying, "We'll destroy you publicly, but if you grovel just right, we might let you back in." You've survived a sack of snakes, poetry-based humiliation, and a trial involving your dog. You've watched ghosts accuse senators and seen an entire trial derailed by a pigeon sneeze. You've been burned, branded, and maybe buried. And yet, somehow, you're still standing. Rome, for all its cruelty, had structure. Even in its strangest punishments, there was an eerie logic, social control through shame, spectacle, and then the sacred. But as the sun sets on this absurd, brutal tour, there's one final lesson whispered on the breeze. Power punishes creatively, and history remembers the ridiculous. Now let's breathe. Your sandals crunch gently against cool gravel as you wander away from the arena of memory. The crowd's roar has faded. The torches have gone out. There's only the soft hush of distant waves brushing a forgotten Roman shore, and the sigh of marble statues watching you from shadowed temples. The punishments may have been harsh, sometimes even laughably bizarre, but they're behind you now, drifting like incense smoke into the night. The darkness isn't threatening anymore. It's comforting. A velvet blanket stretched across the sky. The stars above you are old. Some of them may have shined over those very trials, those very crowds. And now they shine on you, reminding you that everything passes: fame, fear, flame. You pause beside a crumbled wall, brush your fingers over ancient stone, and feel how smooth it is. Centuries of wind and time have softened every edge, just like the images in your mind. The sack with the snake, the donkey hide hat, the poetry punishments, faded now. Just stories, just dreams. As you breathe slowly, feel your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench. You made it through the night. You learned, you cringed, you probably laughed once or twice. And now, you rest. Not as a criminal, not as a poet, just as a dreamer. Sleep comes soft and slow, like fog across a Roman field. Let it take you.